I'm Mary Lindsey with Kansas City Move to Amend, and I'm here with other people from Kansas City Move to Amend, some who came with me and some who came in other ways. And I really appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to speak here at the Occupy Missouri gathering. Some of you may not be aware, but back on June 14th, the City Council of Kansas City, Missouri, passed the Move to Amend resolution, which is calling for a constitutional amendment that would affirm that only human beings and not corporations are persons with constitutional rights, and that money is not speech, and therefore it can be regulated in the political process. Well, we consider it a rather courageous thing for the Kansas City, Missouri City Council to do that, yes, because in a way that goes against their own interests, because, you know, the deep pockets are going to be less interested in supporting them when they take that kind of position, which is very much a pro-people sort of position. But when you think about courage, let's go back to think of the American Revolution. At that point, the colonists, when they started revolting against the British Crown back in 1773-74, they were really putting a lot on the line. They weren't just, jeopardizing political viability. They were putting their lives and their families' lives on the line, because to do what they were doing was treason. And if they had lost, they would have lost everything, their lives and all. But they did it, and they didn't. The colonists did not just revolt against the British Crown, the King of England and all that, but also against British corporations. There were huge corporations in that day, most notably the East India Company, that were really in bed with the political process back in England, and it was very much to the detriment of the colonists. And we've always heard about the Boston Tea Party, but the Tea Party was not just a simple revolt of individual colonists because of no taxation without representation. It really was prompted by the British Tea Act of 1773, which gave the East India Company dramatic tax advantages that hurt the local merchants in the colonies. And that is what prompted them to throw all that tea overboard because, they were fighting the system as it was. So, it took a revolution. It took a revolutionary war for the colonists to be able to win independence from British rule and from the rule by the British corporations. But then they had to form a government and write a constitution. And the constitution that we have now, the document that some people treat as gospel, was a huge effort that took all the 13 colony states to sign off on in order for it to happen. And the Constitution lays out the structure, duties, and powers of government. And then soon after that, the Bill of Rights was passed, and that's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And the Bill of Rights basically defined how the people were to be protected from government. And so that is what that was about. And back then, let's face it, it was a dramatically different time, and the founders of the country and the drafters of the Constitution were white wealthy men. And so, when we're honest about it, back then, we the people, the beginning of the preamble to the Constitution, really only involved between 4 and 7% of the population of the country. Those were the only ones who got to vote. Those were white, property males. And, we now would not think of that as being democratic at all. But actually, it wasn't monarchy. And they could have decided to go with a monarchy. And certainly, I'm glad, and I think most of us are glad they didn't. Yeah. There were some really goofy things in the original Constitution, one of them being that in a presidential election, whoever came in first was president, and whoever lost and came in second was vice president. Well, you can imagine what kind of great working relationship that would make for an administration. So that was one of the early amendments to the Constitution. Since the Bill of Rights, that first 10, there have been 17 in the whole time of the country, and that was one of them. But there were some really, really wise and forward-looking things in the Constitution, and I specifically am talking about Article 5, which lays out how the people can amend the Constitution. So the drafters of the Constitution didn't realize it was pretty silly to do the presidential election as they did, but they did know that their Constitution couldn't be something that would last forever over time. So they put in there a way for us to amend the Constitution. And some of the big things that have happened that were profoundly democratic in amendments to the Constitution, one was abolition of slavery. That involved the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. All were about ending slavery, then giving freed slaves constitutional protections, and then saying that race could not be a bar to voting. Which, of course, that was in 1870, and we know that there was a huge bar of race around voting until many, many years later, when there was another constitutional amendment in 1964 that said that poll taxes could not be used to keep people from voting. And so then that began to really open things up. So we of Move to Amend take inspiration from the abolitionists who ended slavery through an amendment and, of course, a civil war. That was certainly a big part of what the Civil War was about. And through the women's, the suffragettes. That took 72 years from the time that movement began in 1848 until actually women won the right to vote when it was ratified, the 19th Amendment in 1920. That took a really long time to happen. But we take inspiration from them. Those were hard things, but the people fought for them, they persisted, and ultimately they prevailed with amendments in both of those cases. My point in this is that even though right now many of us see a profound problem in corporations and the wealthy having the influence over government that they have, we don't have to have a revolution. We don't have to go to war. We don't have to have anarchy. We can use the Constitution, Article 5, to amend the Constitution to correct the problems that are most dramatically a part of our society right now. But we have to wonder, how in the hell did Citizens United happen? Okay, the Supreme Court decision that came down in January of 2010, that is the one that freed corporations to have to spend unlimited amounts of money campaigning for or against people running for office. A profoundly destructive one that recently was essentially upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court when they said that Montana, the Montana State Supreme Court, there wished to say that it didn't apply in Montana. Basically, the Supreme Court said, yes, it does. All over the country, that is the law of the land.
Yeah.
So, how did that happen? It is based, Citizens United is based on two precedents. One is that a corporation is a person with constitutional protections that really were only intended for human beings. The other is that money is equal to speech, and therefore regulating it in the political process is restricting free speech. Neither of those are in the Constitution. In fact, the word corporation is not mentioned in the Constitution at all. And the word money is only in there 6 times. All of those are early in the Constitution, in which it talks about being able to issue money, being able to tax, to have money, those powers, and then the duty of accounting for the government's money. So anything having remotely to do with money equaling speech is simply not there. So what that means really is that since the Constitution is silent on those things, that the U.S. Supreme Court over time has interpreted those things into the Constitution. They have interpreted in that a corporation is a person and that money equals speech. And those are the two specific things that Move to Amend is fighting. And there are other organizations, although Move to Amend is actually the only one that has our particular language going specifically after these two things. So basically, the reason we need to amend the Constitution is less because of the language in the Constitution and more because of the Supreme Court interpreting into the Constitution what is actually not there. So we, activists who want to do something about this, let us stand on the shoulders of the abolitionists. They fought hundreds of years, actually, to be able to end slavery, to be able to amend the Constitution in that way. Let us stand on the shoulders of the women's suffragettes. They fought for 72 years before they were able to amend the Constitution to give women the right to vote. We need to do that. We need to change the document, the Constitution, into being a people's document and not a document that serves the interests of corporations and of wealthy people. We need all people to be equally protected by the U.S. Constitution. We should amend the Constitution to say that corporations are not people, that only human beings are people under the law, and that money is not speech. We should do it, and we can do it. So I hope everyone here will join with Move to Amend and fight to make this happen. We can do it.